Hey there, welcome back to Animal Encounters. Today, I've compiled some of the deadliest safari attacks ever recorded. From a drone pilot who stepped out of his vehicle in front of a breeding herd, to a leopard in central India that turned a routine wildlife outing into something nobody there could stop. It was July 19th, 2016, and dusk was settling across a private game reserve in northeastern South Africa. The light had dropped quickly, the way it does in the dry winter months, and the scrubland had gone from gold to gray in the span of 20 minutes. Thessaly Van Kamp was a 28-year-old Instagram influencer from Cape Town, whose online presence centered on fitness modeling and adventure travel. Her account had accumulated roughly 6,000 followers, small but growing. Van Kamp had arrived at the lodge 2 days earlier, already posting complaints about mandatory distance requirements that prevented her from capturing the dramatic close-up wildlife shots she needed. The evening game drive departed at 5:45 p.m. with 6 passengers. The guide conducted the standard safety briefing, emphasizing that passengers must remain seated and that approaching predators on foot was strictly prohibited. Each participant signed the lodge's formal liability waiver prior to departure. The vehicle located a spotted hyena clan 40 minutes into the drive. Roughly a dozen hyenas were feeding on an impala carcass in open scrubland, visible in the headlights at the edge of the track. The guide positioned the vehicle at a safe observation distance and cut the engine. The sounds of the feeding clan carried clearly across the still evening air, crunching, tearing, the occasional low whoop rising and falling in the dark. Van Kamp immediately expressed dissatisfaction, stating her camera required closer proximity for usable shots in the low light. The guide refused, explaining that active feeding made the clan unpredictable and that the fading light made any approach on foot extremely dangerous. Van Kamp argued she had done similar approaches on other reserves. The guide maintained his position. In the minutes that followed, 2 passengers on the left side began asking the guide about a second group of hyenas moving in from the north. While he turned to address them, Van Kamp slipped over the right side panel and dropped to the ground. Another passenger shouted. By the time the guide turned back, she had already covered 6 to 8 yards toward the carcass. He ordered her to stop and return immediately. She continued forward, crouching low, camera raised. Spotted hyenas are among Africa's most successful large carnivores, with adult females weighing between 120 and 180 pounds and possessing some of the most powerful jaws of any land predator. Their massive jaw muscles can crush bone and tear through hide with devastating efficiency. Hyenas are highly responsive to changes in silhouette and movement pattern. A crouched or fallen human presents a low profile and erratic motion that can trigger investigatory or predatory behavior, particularly near an active food source. Van Kamp had closed to roughly 15 yards from the carcass, no more than 10 or 12 from the nearest feeding animal, crouching low in near total darkness. At that distance, in that posture, she no longer presented as a standing human. She was a low, unfamiliar shape moving erratically at the edge of a food source. The nearest hyena lifted off the kill. It didn't charge, it advanced, head low. In the distinctive testing approach hyenas use to evaluate unfamiliar movement near a food source. A second clan member rose from the carcass and oriented toward her. She froze briefly, then continued forward. At roughly 12 yards, she shifted her footing on uneven ground and stumbled, dropping to one knee. She was on the ground for only a moment, but that was enough. What followed was fast, but not instant. The investigating hyena closed the remaining distance and bit into her upper leg, a hard, exploratory grab that tore fabric and skin. Van Kamp screamed and twisted sideways, falling fully onto the ground. That escalation, the scream, the fall, the sudden shift from low shape to thrashing movement changed the calculation. The second hyena committed. It came in from the flank and seized her lower leg. She was now flat, screaming, struggling to rise, and the clan's opportunistic instinct took over. Other individuals moved in, biting and releasing and biting again. Not coordinated, not a kill sequence, but chaotic and cumulative. Each animal taking what it could. The sounds carried back to the vehicle before the guide had a clear line. He grabbed his rifle and fired a round into the dirt several feet from the nearest animal. Not into the air, but low, close enough to send debris scattering into the group. The clan flinched but did not fully disengage. A second shot into the ground, closer still. He gunned the engine and advanced the vehicle forward with spotlights on full, revving hard as he closed the distance. The combination of engine noise, headlights, and a third shot finally broke the clan's focus. The nearest animal scattered into the dark scrubland. Van Camp was alive when the guide reached her. She had sustained deep lacerations across her upper thigh, including a deep medial wound with catastrophic arterial bleeding. Blood loss was severe. She remained conscious for several minutes before losing consciousness. The guide applied direct pressure immediately. The vehicle's trauma kit was retrieved by a passenger and passed forward. The injury was a severe proximal femoral wound, too close to the pelvic junction for a limb tourniquet to achieve effective occlusion. Hemostatic packing was attempted, but the volume of blood loss before any compression could be established had already been catastrophic. There were no signs of life when the reserve's contracted emergency medical responder reached the scene. She was declared deceased before evacuation could be completed. Within 24 hours, the story had broken nationally across South African media. It was not Van Camp's following that drove coverage. At 18,000 followers, she was largely unknown outside Cape Town fitness circles. It was the screenshots, her posts from earlier in the trip complaining about distance rules and expressing frustration with the guides, time-stamped days before her death, circulated widely and gave the story a narrative that media outlets ran with. International outlets picked it up within 48 hours. Coverage peaked over 3 to 4 days before fading. The guide was placed on administrative leave during the subsequent investigation, standard procedure. Both the police inquiry and Conservation Authority review concluded no criminal negligence had occurred. The guide was reinstated. No charges were filed. The lodge voluntarily revised its evening drive procedures. It was September 3rd, 2016, when the late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the sprawling bushveld of Kruger National Park, one of South Africa's most famous game reserves. The dry winter air carried the scent of dust and dried grass as temperatures began to cool, drawing predators out from their midday resting spots and into the open. 32-year-old Marianne Miller sat in the passenger seat of a rented sedan, camera in hand, scanning the roadside vegetation for movement as her boyfriend navigated the narrow tar road deeper into the reserve. Marianne had built a modest but growing audience as a travel vlogger, documenting wildlife encounters and scenic destinations across southern Africa. This self-drive safari was meant to be the centerpiece of her latest series, a multi-day journey through Kruger National Park, one of the continent's most iconic wildlife destinations. The couple had entered the park that morning, collecting their entry permit along with a printed set of rules that made one instruction unmistakably clear. Visitors must remain inside their vehicles at all times unless within designated rest camps or fenced picnic areas. Signs reinforcing this rule appeared at regular intervals along the road, some featuring illustrations of lions and leopards to emphasize the ever-present danger lurking just beyond the window glass. The reserve is home to Africa's full complement of apex predators, and every year, thousands of visitors safely observe them by following one simple principle: the vehicle is the barrier. By late afternoon, the couple had already logged several successful sightings. Then, along a quiet stretch of road bordered by thick golden grass, they spotted what every visitor hopes to see. Several lions lay partially concealed in the vegetation just meters from the road, their tawny coats blending seamlessly with the dry surroundings. Other vehicles had already slowed nearby, windows cracked open just enough for camera lenses. African lions are the continent's largest predators, with males weighing up to around 420 pounds and females averaging closer to 260, built from pure muscle and instinct. Despite their reputation for laziness during the heat of the day, lions are ambush hunters capable of explosive acceleration, reaching speeds of 35 miles per hour in short bursts. What makes lions especially dangerous to humans on foot is their predatory response to movement. A person standing upright outside a vehicle no longer appears as part of the car's silhouette. To a lion, that figure instantly registers as something separate, something vulnerable, something worth investigating. Marian's boyfriend stopped the car so she could film through the open window. The footage from that angle was decent, but partially obstructed by the tall grass. After a few moments, Marianne opened the passenger door and stepped out onto the road, camera raised, moving several steps away from the vehicle to get a clearer line of sight toward the resting Pride. That single decision sealed her fate. The moment her feet touched the ground, the dynamic changed. One of the closer lions lifted its head, ears rotating forward, eyes locked onto the figure now standing in the open. A second lion, previously hidden in the thick grass on the opposite side, lowered its body and began advancing in a crouched position, using the vegetation as cover to close the gap without being detected. The distance between the concealed lion and Marianne was short. The charge came fast and silent, the animal covering the ground in seconds before she could react. She turned back toward the car, but the lion was already on her. It struck her from behind with tremendous force, knocking her to the ground beside the vehicle. The lion's claws raked across her back and shoulders, tearing through clothing and skin in a single motion. Its jaws bit into the neck and shoulder area, causing severe trauma and heavy bleeding. The attack lasted only seconds, but caused catastrophic injuries. Deep lacerations from the claws tore muscle across her upper body, while the bite caused severe trauma to the neck and major blood vessels, leading to rapid blood loss. She lost consciousness quickly from the injuries. Her boyfriend remained inside the vehicle and laid on the horn repeatedly, the blaring sound eventually causing the lion to release and step back into the grass. Other drivers kept their distance, but also used their horns, trying to scare the animal away without leaving their vehicles. Marianne lay motionless on the ground, beside the open passenger door. By the time the nearest visitors reached a rest camp and alerted staff, rangers were already being dispatched to the scene. They confirmed she had died from the injuries sustained during the attack. The combination of severe blood loss and trauma had been fatal before medical help could arrive. The investigation determined that all park safety protocols had been properly communicated and that the attack was a direct result of the victim leaving the vehicle in an active predator zone. Officials reiterated that even when lions appear calm and stationary, they remain fully aware of their surroundings and can transition from rest to attack in seconds. It was March 12, 2015, and the midday sun was hammering down on the Crocodile River in South Africa's Mpumalanga province. The water was brown, sluggish, and completely opaque. You couldn't see 6 inches below the surface. The banks were muddy and sloped, lined with thick vegetation hanging low over the water's edge. If you looked closely, you could see drag marks in the mud, smooth grooves where heavy bodies had slid between land and water. There were signs posted along the river, clear ones, the kind with pictures on them so there's no ambiguity. They said crocodiles, and they meant it. Danton Krall was a 42-year-old tourist on a self-drive safari with his family. He wasn't an experienced bushman or someone who'd spent time around African waterways. He was a guy on holiday, driving through one of the most beautiful and dangerous landscapes on the continent. And somewhere along the route, he decided to take a shortcut. Instead of following the designated safe crossing points, Danton chose to cross the river at an unmarked section. Picture this: brown water, zero visibility, muddy banks covered in slide marks, warning signs behind him, and he stepped in anyway. Let me tell you about Nile crocodiles because I think people seriously underestimate these animals. They are ambush predators and terrifyingly good at it. A large male can exceed 16 feet and weigh over 1,600 pounds. They can lie completely submerged for hours, perfectly still. They don't chase, they wait. Their bite is one of the most powerful in the animal kingdom, strong enough to shatter bone on contact. Once they grab you, they do something called a death roll, spinning their entire body to disorient prey, tear tissue, and drag you under. You are not fighting out of that. Nobody is. The most common place for attacks is exactly where Danton was standing. Entry points. The shallow edges where bank meets water. That's where crocs wait. Because that's where prey comes to drink, to wade, to cross. It's a kill zone. And it looks like nothing. Danton stepped into the shallows. The bank was soft, the water barely reaching his shins. A crocodile was lying submerged just off the edge, completely invisible. The vibration of his footstep was all it needed. The strike came from below, explosive, instantaneous. Jaws clamped around his lower leg, teeth punching through skin and muscle and locking against bone. He lost his balance immediately. No time to pull back, no time to brace. The crocodile initiated the death roll. His body was wrenched sideways and dragged into deeper water as the animal spun, rotational force tearing through ligaments and soft tissue. Water flooded his mouth and nose as he was pulled under. He surfaced briefly, just long enough to choke on air and muddy water, before being dragged down again. The croc repositioned its grip and pulled him further from the bank. Each roll drove him deeper, disoriented him further, opened new wounds. Between the injuries and repeated submersion, he had no ability to fight back or find the surface. This one genuinely haunts me. He was with his family. They were right there, and there was absolutely nothing they could do but watch the water. His family witnessed everything from the bank. Entering that water would have meant the same fate. A search operation continued for 3 days. Danton's remains were recovered downstream, submerged beneath a log system where the crocodile had cached the body. Cause of death was drowning, combined with traumatic injuries from the bite and rotational force. Rangers noted the crossing point showed clear signs of animal activity. Slide marks, disturbed mud, indicators that should have kept anyone away. The investigation found no failure on the reserve's part. Signage was present. Safe crossings were available. What I keep coming back to is how ordinary the decision seemed. A shortcut. That's it. Across a river that looked shallow and calm. And beneath it was something waiting. The story reinforced what rangers had been saying for years. The still water is the most dangerous water. It was July 14th, 2017. And the winter sun hung low over the dry thornveld of a private game reserve in South Africa's Limpopo province. The reserve bordered one of the country's largest national parks, sharing unfenced boundaries that allowed elephants and other large animals to move freely. Afternoon game drive safaris departed daily from the lodge in open Land Rovers. Sunel Bezuidenhout, a 51-year-old retired school headmistress from Stellenbosch, had booked the safari holiday through a domestic travel agency. She had arrived 2 days earlier with a small group of friends and had no particular wildlife experience beyond occasional park visits. The afternoon game drive safari was led by Thabiso Ndaba, a 29-year-old guide who had obtained certification 4 years earlier but had limited experience handling high-risk elephant encounters. The vehicle carried 5 guests. What unsettles me about this setup is that most guests on a safari have absolutely no way of knowing whether their guide has 2 years of experience or 20. You place your life in someone else's hands the moment you climb into that vehicle, and you never think to question it. Approximately 2 hours in, Ndaba located a female elephant and a young calf near a waterhole. He maneuvered off the main track, closing the distance to approximately 25 yards, closer than typically recommended for elephants with calves. The female detected the approach immediately, ears flaring wide and head lifting to face the vehicle. A dashboard-mounted camera recorded part of the incident, though much of the critical footage is obscured after the vehicle was overturned. Guests in a second vehicle, roughly 80 yards away, also recorded portions of the encounter. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth, with adult females weighing between 6,000 and 8,000 pounds. Females with calves are among the most dangerous wildlife encounters on the continent. Elephants communicate agitation through warning signals, including ear flaring, head shaking, and mock charges. When these warnings fail, the response escalates to a full charge at speeds exceeding 20 miles per hour, with enough mass to overturn vehicles. Every single warning sign was visible. The ears, the head shaking, the mock charges, and still the vehicle didn't move fast enough. That's the part that's difficult to accept. The signals were all there, and they weren't enough. The elephant issued 2 mock charges, lunging forward with ears spread wide before pulling up short. Ndaba began reversing, but the rear wheels caught in soft sand, slowing the retreat. After repeated mock charges, the elephant committed fully. She closed the remaining distance in seconds, striking the vehicle broadside and forcing it onto its side after repeated impact. Bezuidenhout was thrown from the exposed upper tier. She landed between the overturned vehicle and the charging elephant. The animal struck and trampled her before she could move, then continued to push and strike the vehicle briefly before retreating toward her calf. Bezuidenhout was pronounced dead at the scene from crushing injuries. Ndaba and remaining guests survived with injuries. What makes this one sit so heavy with me is that Bezuidenhout did nothing wrong. She trusted her guide, stayed in her seat, and followed every rule. Sometimes survival depends entirely on decisions someone else makes for you, and that's a terrifying thing to sit with. The investigation found Ndaba had positioned the vehicle well inside safe distance and failed to withdraw at the first signs of agitation. The reserve suspended Ndaba and overhauled training protocols. No action was taken against the elephant. The dashboard footage was submitted to investigators as part of a civil liability review and has not been officially released. The second vehicle's footage was shared privately, though portions later appeared on social media. It was September 23, 2016, when Rexton Drayle and Lumi Skirt arrived at a tiger reserve in central India, chasing golden hour footage. Rexton, 33, had built his following filming risky wildlife encounters operators prohibited. Lumi, 29, specialized in capturing animals in fading sunset light when the forest glowed amber through dust and leaves. They rented a safari jeep with a local driver and entered a zone known for recent tiger sightings, dense bamboo thickets, and limited visibility along narrow dirt tracks. Movements were logged through checkpoints and radio updates. Earlier that afternoon, impatient for dramatic footage, Rexton persuaded the driver to linger near a quieter sector where fresh pug marks had been reported. As evening approached and traffic thinned, they convinced him to pause along a silent stretch bordered by elephant grass and scattered sal trees, despite his unease. Dry forest stretched in every direction, shadows lengthening as the sun sank. Earlier clips showed them laughing softly while langur alarm calls echoed, and peacocks cried from deeper brush, the sky filtering orange through dust haze. Near dusk, they stopped by a clearing where tall grass met the forest edge, glowing in sunset light. Rexton grabbed his camera rig while Lumi gathered lenses. They had done this before, stepping down for quick shots meant to stand out online, despite repeated warnings to stay inside vehicles, and that exiting in tiger habitat was forbidden. Bengal tigers are most active near dusk and dawn, hunting alone and using dense vegetation for concealment. Their striped coats break their outline in grass and shadow, letting them vanish even nearby. A stalking tiger may watch prey for minutes before launching a short, explosive ambush aimed at the neck or throat. The fatal mistake came when Rexton and Lumi slipped a short distance off the track, still within sight of the jeep, focused on their shots while the driver called nervously for them to return. Deeper in the trees, a langur barked sharply, followed by the alarm call of a sambar deer. Warnings neither understood. Neither noticed the tiger resting in shade beyond the grass line, alert the moment they stepped down. The tiger rose silently, body low, shoulders rolling in controlled steps. It approached from behind through the grass, using fading light for cover. By the time it closed to striking distance, Rexton adjusted exposure while Lumi crouched to swap lenses, both with their backs turned. The attack came without warning. The tiger burst from the grass and struck Lumi first, slamming into her back and driving her face down into the soil. In the same motion, its jaws locked onto her throat. The bite compressed her airway and major vessels as the tiger tightened its suffocating clamp. Lumi convulsed briefly, then weakened rapidly as airflow and circulation were cut off. Rexton spun at the impact and froze. He shouted and stumbled backward, half turning as if to run, raising the camera in panic. The movement triggered the tiger's response. After the grip left Lumi limp, the tiger released just long enough to pivot and lunged toward him in 2 strides. It collided with Rexton's torso, knocking him into the grass. The impact drove the breath from his lungs as claws raked his chest and shoulder. While the animal grappled to control him, Rexton struggled, twisting and pushing at the tiger's head as it shifted its weight over him. Within seconds, the tiger planted a forepaw across his chest and clamped its jaws onto the side of his neck in a deeper bite. The pressure crushed tissue and punctured major vessels. Blood spread into the grass as the tiger held firm, tightening until Rexton's movements slowed, then stopped. The forest fell quiet, except for rustling grass and the tiger's heavy breathing. After a pause, the tiger returned to Lumi, gripping her by the neck and dragging her toward thicker brush at the forest edge. It then came back for Rexton, hauling him in the same direction, pulling both bodies into dense bamboo where visibility vanished within meters. The attack unfolded in well under 2 minutes. The abandoned jeep remained on the track, doors ajar, cameras scattered nearby. The shaken driver radioed forest staff once he realized the couple had not returned. Fading light and safety rules prohibiting night searches delayed entry. Rangers located the scene early the next morning after tracking the checkpoint log and the driver's report. Flattened grass and drag marks showed where the ambush occurred before vanishing into dense vegetation. The investigation concluded that Rexton and Lumi had illegally exited their vehicle in active tiger habitat during peak movement hours, ignoring safety rules meant to prevent such encounters. The reserve later reinforced visitor briefings, increased patrols near dusk, and tightened enforcement against unauthorized stops or exits. It was October 9th, 2017. Deep inside Hwang National Park, Zimbabwe, the afternoon sun had already begun its slow descent behind the acacia canopy. The air was thick with dust and the low hum of insects. Narrow dirt tracks wound through the park like veins, flanked on both sides by dense, impenetrable bush, walls of vegetation so thick that anything could be standing just meters away, completely invisible. Gareth Cole was 41 years old, an automotive mechanic by trade who liked to film his adventures and post it online. He had come to southern Africa on a self-drive safari with 2 longtime friends, a road trip across multiple countries, ticking off the big parks one by one. He had no formal wildlife training. What he knew about African animals came from casual observation and the kind of confidence that builds when nothing has gone wrong yet. Earlier that same day, he had pushed the vehicle closer than advisable near grazing animals. Nothing happened. That outcome had quietly reinforced a dangerous assumption that the rules were suggestions and that the bush would give warning before it gave consequence. The park had not been silent on the matter. Signage along the route was explicit. African buffalo were responsible for serious injuries and fatalities. Visitors were to remain inside their vehicles at all times. Gareth had seen the signs. He had kept moving. The African buffalo is one of the most dangerous and consistently underestimated animals on the continent. It does not look like a predator. It grazes. It stands in the shade and flicks flies from its back. A mature bull can weigh over 800 kilograms, its horns forming a fused boss across the skull before curving outward into points capable of penetrating deep into the body. When a buffalo charges, it does not bluff. It commits. What makes the buffalo especially lethal is its relationship with dense vegetation. Herds rest in thick bush during the heat of the day, largely invisible, largely silent. They do not announce themselves. They do not retreat simply because a human is nearby. They detect disturbance and react suddenly and explosively when surprised. Late afternoon, Gareth's vehicle had stopped along a narrow section of track where the bush pressed in close on both sides. Visibility beyond the tree line was reduced to almost nothing. There was movement in the brush, faint, indistinct, a low, barely audible exhale from somewhere inside the thicket. A sound that registered as background noise rather than warning. Gareth stepped out of the vehicle, wanting to film the moment. He hesitated briefly at the edge, then forced his way forward, pushing through interlocking branches and dry, resistant brush that snagged at his clothing and limited his view with every step. He moved approximately 10 to 15 meters into the thicket. Large shapes sat partially obscured by layered vegetation. forms that did not immediately resolve into recognizable animals. The herd had been resting there. They were already aware of him. One mature bull reacted first. The head dropped, the body angled forward, and then it moved. The distance closed in seconds. The bull's horn made contact at an upward angle, forceful, partially glancing but powerful enough to lift Gareth off his feet. He hit the ground hard. The animal's momentum carried it through, hooves coming down as it passed. The trampling was not deliberate. It was simply the consequence of mass and speed and a body that had no reason to stop. The attack lasted only several seconds. The bull continued forward, paused, then turned back into the thicket. Gareth's two friends remained inside the vehicle and did not approach until the animal had fully withdrawn. The injuries were unsurvivable. Deep, penetrating trauma from the horn impact, severe internal bleeding, blunt force trauma from the trampling. Death came rapidly from hemorrhage and organ failure. An investigation was opened by park authorities in the days that followed. The findings were straightforward. A visitor who had exited his vehicle in an area of near zero visibility, in proximity to a resting herd, with no awareness of what was already there. Gareth's family received the news back home. Those who knew him described a man who had been genuinely excited about the trip, someone who had talked about it for months. The public reaction carried a familiar weight, grief, and the quiet acknowledgement that the bush does not negotiate. It was November 3rd, 2016, and the dry season heat still held across Zimbabwe's Mana Pools National Park, one of the few remaining wilderness areas where canoe safaris are permitted through genuinely wild river terrain. The Zambezi ran low and slow, its surface glassy in the late afternoon light, dotted with sandbanks and the dark shapes of wallowing hippos. Elephants moved along the far bank in silhouette. René Aubert was a 36-year-old travel writer from Lyon, France, whose work appeared in several European adventure publications. Aubert had been commissioned to produce a long-form piece on canoe safaris, the experience of navigating the Zambezi at water level, among the animals, without the insulation of a vehicle. It was the intimacy of the experience she had come to document. She had kayaked rivers in Europe and South America, and did not consider herself inexperienced on the water. The afternoon excursion launched at 3:15 p.m. with 3 guests, a licensed guide paddling lead, and a second guide at the rear. The briefing was thorough. Hippos were to be given a minimum of 50 meters. Pods were to be skirted wide. Under no circumstances were guests to paddle between a hippo and the nearest bank. The guides carried air horns. No guest was permitted to alter course independently. The group had been on the water for approximately an hour and 20 minutes when the lead guide raised his paddle to halt. A pod of 11 hippos occupied a wide bend roughly 80 meters ahead, clustered near the left bank. Several were submerged, their positions marked only by the slow rise of their backs and the occasional sweep of an ear. Others were visible at the waterline, jaws resting on the surface. The guide directed the group to hold while he assessed the channel to the right. Aubert, positioned in the middle canoe, had been photographing the pod. She later described in audio notes, recovered from her equipment, that she wanted a lower angle on the nearest hippo, which had surfaced and was facing the group. While the lead guide scanned the right channel and the rear guide steadied his canoe against a slow current, Aubert made several short forward strokes, closing perhaps 15 meters without alerting either guide. Common hippopotamuses are among the most dangerous animals in Africa, responsible for an estimated 500 or more human fatalities per year, more than any predator. Adult males weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds, with canine teeth exceeding 20 inches. They are acutely territorial in and around water, and a pod near a bank with submerged individuals represents one of the most dangerous configurations a river traveler can encounter. The animal's low profile underwater makes them nearly impossible to track. They surface without warning, and a canoe directly above a submerged hippo has almost no reaction time before contact. The nearest hippo submerged as Aubert moved forward. The rear guide saw her position and called out sharply. She paused and looked back. The canoe lifted from below. The impact came from below and slightly to the right, a bull surfacing beside and under the hull at speed, striking with enough force to send the canoe rolling hard to the left. Aubert was thrown clear and hit the water several feet away. The bull struck the overturned hull immediately, crushing it partially underwater before surfacing fully, mouth open, jaws spread wide, tusks exposed, then turning away from the wreckage. The rear guide was already paddling hard toward her. Aubert had surfaced, disoriented, treading water approximately 6 meters from the bull. The bull turned toward her movement. It made contact once, a single lateral strike with its head that drove her beneath the surface. The rear guide reached the site within seconds and thrust his paddle toward her. She caught it briefly before losing her grip. The bull moved off, rejoining the pod. The guides pulled her from the water within a minute. Aubert was conscious when they reached the bank, but the blow had caused severe internal injuries, suspected splenic rupture, and significant blunt trauma to the left thoracic cavity. She was lucid briefly, asking what had happened, before deteriorating rapidly. The guides stabilized her as best they could and activated their emergency beacon. The initial signal was not confirmed for nearly 20 minutes due to relay delays in the remote terrain. The evacuation aircraft faced further delay from crosswind conditions at the nearest airstrip. The aircraft reached the site 2 hours and 10 minutes after the incident. Attending medical personnel declared René Aubert deceased prior to loading. The post-mortem confirmed massive internal hemorrhage consistent with blunt force trauma from a large animal strike. Authority review found the guides had briefed properly and responded appropriately. Aubert had moved forward in violation of explicit instructions. No charges were filed. The operator initially contested the review's characterization of its spacing protocols, but accepted the findings and suspended operations for 30 days. The incident prompted safety reviews among several Zimbabwean canoe safari operators. It was January 9th, 2017, and the morning air was still cool at Luluva Imfolozi Park in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province. The landscape was wide open, rolling hills of green and gold bushveld, scattered with fever trees and patches of thick scrub. A waterhole sat in a shallow depression ahead, its edges trampled into dark mud by the constant traffic of animals coming to drink. A small herd of elephants had gathered there, some wading knee-deep, others standing along the bank, trunks curling into the water. From a distance, it looked peaceful, postcard stuff, the kind of scene that makes you forget where you actually are. Stellan Guff was a 51-year-old tourist visiting the park with a group of friends. No background in wildlife behavior, no real experience with African animals beyond what he'd seen on TV. And look, I get it. There's something about seeing an elephant in the wild that hits different than any zoo or documentary. But excitement without understanding is a dangerous combination out here. The group had driven to the waterhole and stopped at a safe viewing distance. Other vehicles were parked nearby, windows down, cameras clicking. Everything was calm. But Stellan wasn't satisfied with the view from inside. He wanted closer. He opened the door and stepped out. So let me talk about elephants for a second, because I think people have this completely wrong. You see the gentle giant thing, and you stop thinking. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth. A bull can weigh over 13,000 pounds and move at speeds up to 25 miles per hour when charging. At that size, you feel the ground shake. But here's what you really need to understand. Elephants tell you before they attack. They give you warnings, clear ones, ears flared wide, trunk raised, head shaking, mock charges where they stomp forward and stop short. That's the animal telling you to leave. And if those signals escalate, ears pin back, head drops low, trunk tucks underneath, that's not a warning anymore. That's a decision. Once that switch flips, you're not outrunning it, you're not dodging it, and you're not changing its mind. The moment Stellan stepped out, one of the bulls turned toward him. It performed a textbook mock charge. Ears spread wide, trunk up. A short burst forward followed by a hard stop. The ground vibrated. Dust kicked up. Every other vehicle in the area went dead quiet. Stellan didn't get back in the vehicle. I don't know what was going through his head, and I'm not going to pretend I do. But he stayed outside, standing upright, fully exposed. And the elephant's behavior shifted. Ears came down, head dropped, trunk tucked tight against the chest. If you know anything about elephants, you know exactly what that means. It charged. Full speed, no bluff, no hesitation. The distance closed in seconds. The impact. I mean, imagine over 6 tons just driving straight into you. Stellan was knocked to the ground instantly, but the elephant didn't stop. It kept moving forward, driving over him. The first trampling blow came down on his chest. Ribs collapsed under the pressure. Then again, and again. Each step brought thousands of pounds of force down onto his body. His ribcage crushed inward, compressing lungs and heart. Internal hemorrhaging was immediate and catastrophic. I have to be honest with you, this is one of those stories where I just sit with it. The animal told him. It literally showed him what was coming. Ears out, trunk up, mock charge. That's an elephant begging you to leave. And he just didn't. The rest of the group stayed inside their vehicle. There was nothing anyone could do once that charge began. Rangers confirmed Stellan was dead at the scene. Cause of death was chest compression and internal hemorrhage from elephant trampling. The park's investigation found no fault with staff or infrastructure. The elephant followed a clear escalation. Warning displays, then a defensive charge after those warnings were ignored. The animal was not destroyed. Elephant did everything right. It gave him every chance to walk away, every single one, and he didn't take any of them. The story spread through wildlife tourism circles as another reminder that these animals aren't attractions. They're wild, they're enormous, and they're communicating the entire time, if you're willing to listen. It was February 22nd, 2015, and a cool morning haze hung over the forested hills of a wildlife sanctuary in Madhya Pradesh, central India. The sanctuary's dense sal and teak forests sheltered a concentrated population of large predators, drawing steady traffic from visitors who booked open jeep safari excursions through the reserve's unpaved forest tracks. Harshavardhan Kulkarni, a 45-year-old industrialist from Pune, was a frequent visitor to India's wildlife sanctuaries. He maintained a large personal archive of big cat photographs and considered himself deeply knowledgeable about predator behavior. He had arrived the previous evening and requested the earliest available morning jeep safari departure. The safari guide, Devrath Parihar, a 37-year-old licensed naturalist with the State Forest Department, operated the lead vehicle in a convoy of 3 open-top jeeps. Parihar briefed passengers to remain seated at all times and avoid sudden movements or loud noise near animals. Approximately 90 minutes into the morning jeep safari, the convoy located a large male leopard resting on a low branch near the track at unusually close distance. Parihar cut the engine. Kulkarni immediately began photographing. Unsatisfied with the angle, he stood up in the open vehicle and moved toward the front, gaining elevation and closing the apparent distance to the leopard. The sudden upright posture, direct eye contact, and sharp noise he made attempting to get the cat to turn its head created a combination of triggers at dangerously close range. I can't wrap my head around that decision. You're sitting yards from one of the most explosive predators on the planet, and you stand up and shout at it. That's a level of confidence that only works until the one time it doesn't. Tourists in the second jeep, roughly 15 yards behind, had been filming the leopard. Their camera captured the moments leading up to the attack before the footage becomes chaotic and cuts out. Leopards are among the most powerful predators relative to their body size, with adult males weighing between 130 and 175 pounds. When threatened at close range, a leopard's defensive response is immediate and violent, targeting the head and upper body with claws capable of opening deep lacerations and a bite strong enough to penetrate deeply and cause severe trauma. Leopard attacks on humans are most commonly defensive, triggered by sudden movement or noise, and typically end with rapid disengagement. The reaction was instantaneous. The leopard launched from the branch in a rapid burst of claws and bites, lasting only seconds, striking primarily at Kulkarni's head and upper body. He collapsed backward across the seats as the animal struck. Parihar threw the jeep into gear and accelerated. The leopard disengaged almost immediately and disappeared into the undergrowth. What strikes me about leopard attacks is how fast they begin and end. A few seconds of absolute chaos, The animal vanishes like it was never there, and then you see the damage it left behind. That speed is what makes them so dangerous. Kulkarni had sustained severe lacerations to his head and neck, including a deep puncture wound that caused significant arterial bleeding. Parihar and the other guests applied pressure with whatever cloth was available, but the bleeding was difficult to control. He lost consciousness during the prolonged evacuation along winding forest roads. Despite efforts to stabilize him, he succumbed to his injuries before reaching the district hospital approximately 90 minutes later. The combination of severe blood loss and delayed access to advanced medical care proved fatal. 90 minutes on a winding forest road, not knowing whether the person in the back seat is going to make it. I think about Parihar behind the wheel during that drive, and it's hard to imagine carrying that weight. The investigation determined he had provoked the attack by standing, making direct eye contact, and producing noise at dangerously close range. Reserve authorities restricted the footage, citing an ongoing safety review. Stills surfaced on Indian news outlets within weeks, though no confirmed complete footage has been publicly released. He didn't make it, and every other guest on that safari followed the rules and walked away without a scratch. One decision separated him from them, and it played out in less than 5 seconds. It was August 18, 2018, when Vesta Twill and her student Arlen Pike approached the muddy banks of a slow-moving river in southern Africa, cameras ready to capture wildlife education footage. Vesta, a 34-year-old science teacher, had organized a small educational safari trip to teach her students about African ecosystems. Arlen, a curious 12-year-old with a passion for animals, had volunteered to assist with filming clips for her classroom. The river wound through the savannah like a brown serpent, its surface calm and deceptively peaceful. Thick vegetation lined the banks, and muddy slopes showed clear signs of animal activity, with tracks leading to the water's edge. The group had stopped their vehicle near a bend where Vesta wanted to film a segment about aquatic predators. Earlier in the day, their guide had warned them about crocodiles hiding near muddy banks, perfectly camouflaged and waiting for prey. The warning seemed distant as Vesta and Arlen focused on getting the shot. The rest of the group remained near the vehicle while the teacher and student descended the slope. Nile crocodiles are among Africa's most dangerous predators, capable of taking down large prey. They can remain motionless for hours, with only eyes and nostrils above water. Adults can exceed 16 feet and weigh more than 1,500 pounds with immense bite force. When they strike, they explode from the water with shocking speed, clamping onto victims and dragging them into deeper water. The fatal mistake came when Vesta and Arlen stepped down the muddy slope and moved within striking range. Arlen walked ahead for a clearer camera angle. Both stayed focused on filming, unaware a large crocodile had been watching from the shallows, concealed by murky water and mud. The attack happened instantly. The crocodile lunged forward, jaws clamping down on Arlen's right leg below the knee. The boy screamed as teeth crushed bone and muscle. The animal immediately pulled backward, dragging him toward the water. Vesta dropped her camera and grabbed Arlen's arms, trying to pull him back up the slope. For a moment she slowed the reptile's pull, but the saturated bank beneath her boots suddenly crumbled. The mud collapsed into the river's edge, exposing a deeper channel just below the surface. She slipped into the drop, lost leverage, and her grip slid free as both were dragged into the water. Once submerged near the bank, the crocodile initiated a violent death roll, spinning rapidly and churning the muddy water into foam. The rotation tore Arlen from Vesta's grasp almost immediately as the crocodile completed the roll and pulled him fully into the river. Vesta surfaced briefly in the deeper pocket left by the collapsed bank, gasping and reaching toward the spot where he vanished. The crocodile resurfaced with Arlen still locked in its jaws, then forced him underwater again, submerging him repeatedly and holding him longer each time as it maneuvered toward deeper water. Unseen in the murk, another crocodile had already been resting in a deeper pool downstream, drawn by vibrations of the struggle. As the splashing intensified and the scent of blood spread, it surfaced silently and drifted closer beneath the muddy surface. Vesta, disoriented, tried to wade back toward the bank, but the collapsed edge left her in unexpectedly deep, waist-to-chest-high water. She struggled for footing in the soft silt, turning to climb out where the slope had given way. That was when the second crocodile struck. It surged upward from the deeper pool beside her, jaws snapping shut on her side and lower torso. The impact knocked the air from her lungs and dragged her backward into the deeper channel before she could scream. The reptile pulled her under, then rolled once, violently twisting her body. The force caused catastrophic internal injuries as teeth tore through muscle and organs. She surfaced briefly in the churning water, unable to draw a full breath before the crocodile submerged her again. The repeated submersions and trauma quickly overwhelmed her. Nearby, the first crocodile maintained its grip on Arlen, keeping him underwater for extended periods. After several forced submersions, his movements ceased, and the animal held him below the surface before drifting toward deeper water. The second crocodile continued holding Vesta submerged until she, too, stopped struggling. Only after the water calmed did both reptiles remain still, their victims secured beneath the surface. Members of the group who witnessed the attack from the vehicle immediately called for help, but there was nothing they could do. Rangers arrived within the hour, but could not recover the bodies immediately due to crocodiles in the area. Recovery operations took 2 days. The investigation concluded that Vesta and Arlen had approached too close to the water's edge in an area known for crocodile activity. The institution that organized the trip faced scrutiny for inadequate safety protocols. It was October 2nd, 2018, and the night had settled heavy over a perimeter campsite on the edge of Kruger National Park in South Africa. No fences, no barrier, just canvas tents, a fire pit, and the bush pressing in from every direction. The kind of place that sells you on sleeping under the stars with nothing between you and the wild. And I mean nothing. The air was warm and dry, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and whatever had been cooked for dinner. If you listened carefully, you could hear movement in the darkness, rustling grass, the occasional crack of a branch, and somewhere beyond the firelight, vocalizations. Whooping, cackling calls carrying across the flat terrain. Hyenas. They'd been active in the area for weeks. Miran Slat was a 29-year-old tourist staying at the campsite with her partner during a safari trip. She wasn't a wildlife expert or someone who'd spent time in the African bush before. She was on vacation, staying at a camp that marketed itself as an authentic wilderness experience. And to be fair, it was authentic. That was the problem. The campsite had known hyena activity. Staff were aware that spotted hyenas regularly moved through the area, and the animals had become habituated to human food sources over time. Cooking residue, scraps, improperly stored waste, all of it had been conditioning these hyenas to associate the camp with easy meals. Those vocalizations Miran heard that night weren't random. Those animals knew exactly where they were. Let me tell you about spotted hyenas, because most people picture some scrawny scavenger skulking around in the background. That's not what these animals are. They can weigh up to 140 pounds, run in organized groups, and their bite force is one of the strongest of any mammal, strong enough to crush bone. They're not just scavengers, they're active hunters that take down wildebeest, zebra, even young buffalo. And they're smart, uncomfortably smart. They test situations, they circle, they probe for weakness. Once they identify vulnerability, they commit fast and they commit together. That night, Miran left the safe area of the camp. She moved towards the perimeter where food waste had been left exposed. She was crouched low, and I need you to understand what that looks like to a hyena. A human standing upright is one thing. A human crouched in the dark, near a food source, moving slowly. That's something small and accessible. A hyena approached from the darkness, cautious at first, circling wide before tightening the distance. Then it delivered an exploratory bite to her lower body. The force knocked her off balance and she fell. And this is where everything accelerated. The sounds she made, the distress, the panic, that's a trigger. Hyenas are wired to respond to distress vocalizations. It signals vulnerability. It signals prey. More hyenas converged from different angles. The bites came fast. Legs, torso, arms, each one tearing through clothing and into tissue. Hyenas don't kill like a lion does. There's no single suffocating bite. They pull you apart. They bite and tear and keep going. Miran tried to retreat. But she was already on the ground, already overwhelmed. The feeding behavior escalated once the group confirmed she couldn't fight back. Blood loss mounted with every wound. I'm going to be real with you. This one is difficult. She was on a trip that was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, and she walked into something she had no way of understanding, at a camp that should have done more to prevent exactly this. Her partner and other campers couldn't intervene. Cause of death was confirmed as exsanguination from multiple bite wounds. The investigation flagged the campsite for repeated predator food conditioning. Improper waste management had been drawing hyenas in for some time. Strict hygiene protocols were reinforced across the region. The incident raised hard questions about the responsibility of unfenced camps operating in active predator zones. What stays with me is that this wasn't really her mistake. The camp created the conditions. The hyenas learned the Kai pattern, and Miran just happened to be the one there when it all came together. Her story became a persistent talking point in South African tourism. How much risk is acceptable when you're selling people the wilderness? It was October 11th, 2013, and the morning air carried a sharp chill across the rocky valleys of a private desert conservancy in Namibia's Kunene region. The conservancy was home to a small population of desert-adapted black rhinos, among the rarest large mammals on Earth. It offered guided walking rhino tracking safaris. Small groups led on foot through rugged terrain to observe rhinos at a distance. Torbjørn Vikeland, a 47-year-old marine engineer from Tromsø, Norway, had arrived as part of a broader Southern African safari itinerary. An experienced outdoorsman comfortable on rough ground, this was his first African safari. The walking safari group of 3 guests was led by Isak Garoeb, a 41-year-old Namibian guide with over a decade of experience tracking black rhinos through the Kunene's rocky riverbeds. A second tracker accompanied the group as standard protocol. Garoeb briefed the group that black rhinos were unpredictable and that if the animal displayed agitation, everyone must move behind rock cover immediately. The trackers located fresh spoor in a dry riverbed approximately 2 hours in. 40 minutes later, the group spotted a solitary black rhino at a cautious but acceptable distance of roughly 80 to 100 yards. Garoeb positioned the group behind a cluster of boulders. Another guest had been recording the sighting on a handheld camera from behind the rocks. Only the moments before the charge were captured clearly. Once the rhino turned, the camera was dropped as the guests scrambled for cover. There's something deceptive about those quiet observation moments on a walking safari. Everything feels calm and controlled. The animal is just standing there, and you almost forget that it could close that distance before you finish a single breath. Black rhinos are among the most aggressive large mammals in Africa, weighing between 1,800 and 3,000 pounds and capable of reaching high speeds despite their massive bulk. Their eyesight is poor, but their senses of smell and hearing are acute. Black rhinos charge directly and with commitment, lowering their heads to bring their anterior horn into devastating contact. The impact is sufficient to knock an adult off their feet with bone-breaking force. The wind had been carrying the group's scent away from the rhino. Without warning, the breeze shifted. The rhino's head snapped upward, nostrils flaring. It wheeled toward the group and charged. Garoeb shouted for everyone to scatter behind the rocks. 2 guests and the second tracker dove behind the boulders immediately. Vikeland froze for a critical moment before turning and running in the open, away from cover rather than toward it. That freeze is what haunts me. It wasn't recklessness. It wasn't defiance. His body just chose the wrong option in the 1 second that mattered, and there was no way to undo it. The rhino closed the distance at high speed. Vikeland was struck from behind, the horn impacting his lower back and knocking him violently forward. The rhino ran over him without stopping, its massive weight driving across his body before disappearing into the scrub. The entire attack lasted seconds. Garoeb reached Vikeland within a minute. He was unresponsive with no signs of life. He was pronounced dead before reaching the nearest medical facility. The investigation concluded the sudden wind shift gave no time to react, and that Garoeb's instructions had been correct. The incident was ruled unavoidable. The Conservancy revised minimum tracking distances. The recovered camera footage was turned over to the victim's family as part of the repatriation process. The family has never authorized its release, and the Conservancy has respected their wishes. This is the hardest story to sit with because nobody did anything wrong. The guide was experienced, the distance was acceptable, the protocol was followed, the wind just changed direction, and that was enough to end a man's life. Sometimes nature doesn't need a mistake to be lethal. It was March 8th, 2015, and pre-dawn darkness was lifting across Tanzania's Serengeti ecosystem. A small walking safari group prepared to depart from a mobile camp positioned along a seasonal migration route. Corien Dwelman was a 34-year-old wildlife blogger from Utrecht, Netherlands, whose website documented conservation issues across East Africa. Dwelman had spent 3 weeks following the wildebeest migration. Her work focused on ground-level perspectives that vehicle-based safaris could not match. The group consisted of 6 participants, an armed professional guide, and a tracker. The briefing emphasized that participants must remain in a tight group, maintain silence, and follow instructions without hesitation. The group departed at 6:20 a.m., moving slowly through chest-high grass. Late-season growth had thickened the vegetation beyond typical density, reducing ground-level visibility to 20 yards or less in places. The guide chose a route skirting a dry riverbed, bordered by thick vegetation. Terrain that offered good photographic vantage points but limited sight lines into surrounding cover. It was the kind of landscape where anything could be lying in the grass 20 feet away and remain completely invisible. Wind conditions that morning were variable, with gusts shifting direction unpredictably. 45 minutes in, the wind shifted and held. The guide recognized the danger immediately. They were now upwind of terrain they had just passed through. He raised his hand to halt and turned to scan behind them. The lioness emerged from the grass 20 yards back, body low, ears flat. 2 small cubs were visible behind her. The guide understood the situation in an instant. They had moved unknowingly close to a female with cubs, and the wind shift had delivered their scent. Dwelman, walking at the rear of the group, the position she had been assigned that morning, was the nearest figure. The guide raised his rifle. The lioness charged before he could find a safe angle. She came in a straight line directly through Dwelman's position, partially obscured by the chest-high grass, and any shot risked hitting her. The charge covered 20 yards in under 3 seconds. African lions are apex predators, weighing between 260 and 375 pounds for females, capable of speeds approaching 35 miles per hour over short distances. Their defensive kill centers on the throat, jaws clamping to occlude airflow until the threat is neutralized. Lions do not feed during or immediately after a defensive charge. The attack is about eliminating a perceived threat to cubs, not predation. The lioness struck Dwelman with full force, driving her backward off her feet and into the grass. She repositioned within seconds, clamping her jaws around Dwelman's throat. The guide still could not fire. Dwelman and the lioness were locked together, and the tracker was in the background. The tracker shouted and waved his arms, but the animal held. Dwelman's movement ceased within roughly a minute. The lioness held her grip briefly longer before releasing and stepping back. As the lioness turned toward her cubs, the guide fired a warning shot into the air. The animal disappeared into the grass. He approached immediately. Dwelman showed no signs of life. He and the tracker briefly attempted CPR, but the severity of the tracheal and cervical trauma made resuscitation impossible, and the attempt was abandoned within minutes. Emergency protocols were initiated via radio, but the remote location placed them over an hour from medical facilities. District medical personnel confirmed death upon arrival. Dwelman had followed every instruction she had been given. She had not broken formation, had not moved independently, had done nothing that separated her from the group. She had simply been at the back, the position assigned to her, when the wind shifted. The inquest ruled the death accidental, noting that the guide's route through terrain with limited visibility, combined with dense late-season grass and unpredictable wind, may have increased the group's risk exposure. The guide was suspended from walking safari duties, pending retraining. The operator's walking safari license was placed under review pending revised protocols. The case received regional coverage and was discussed at an East African Professional Guides Conference the following year as a case study in environmental risk assessment. It was May 11th, 2015, when the African sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. painting the floodplains of northern Botswana in shades of amber and burnt orange. Along the riverfront of Chobe National Park, the air was thick with humidity and the sounds of the bush, distant elephants trumpeting, fish eagles circling overhead, and low guttural grunts of massive creatures moving through the shallows just beyond the tree line. This stretch of river was one of the most biodiverse corridors on the continent, where elephants, buffalo, crocodiles, and one of Africa's most dangerous animals converged every evening as the heat gave way to golden hour. 27-year-old Ava Spratt had traveled to Botswana with 3 close friends after finishing a freelance project documenting nature travel destinations across southern Africa. Ava was a wildlife photography content creator who had recently shifted towards safari imagery, building a growing portfolio of close-range animal portraits that set her apart from the standard landscape photographers flooding the market. Her ambition was clear. She wanted shots that made the viewer feel as though they were standing face-to-face with Africa's most iconic species. That ambition had brought her here, to the edge of one of the most dangerous waterways on the continent. The group had booked a guided afternoon game drive along the riverfront, a popular excursion that followed dirt tracks running parallel to the water's edge. Their guide was experienced, a local professional who had spent years navigating these routes. He drove an open-sided 4x4 safari vehicle, elevated enough to provide safety but completely open on the sides, relying on passengers to remain seated at all times. As the afternoon wore on, the vehicle slowed near a narrow section of shoreline the guide mentioned was often used by hippos moving between the river and grazing areas at dusk, a spot known among guides as a crossing point. The guide warned the group to stay seated, explaining that animals frequently used this exact path and that blocking it could provoke a charge. Hippopotamuses are widely regarded as the most dangerous large land animal in Africa, responsible for more human fatalities than lions, leopards, and crocodiles combined. Despite their rotund appearance, hippos are extraordinarily aggressive and capable of astonishing violence. An adult male can weigh over 4,000 pounds, yet move at speeds close to 20 miles per hour on land, faster than most humans can sprint. Hippos do not attack to feed. They attack because they perceive a threat to their territory or their path between water and land. When a hippo charges, there is no bluff. What makes them particularly unpredictable is their behavior at dusk. They follow established routes from river to grazing land with rigid consistency, and any obstacle along that route is treated as a direct threat. The response is immediate and violent. Ava spotted a large hippo partially submerged near the shore, ears twitching and nostrils flaring above the waterline. The proximity was closer than anything she had captured before, and the fading light created exactly the dramatic conditions she had been chasing. She stood up from her seat, bracing one foot on the side rail and leaning her upper body outside the open frame of the vehicle. The guide immediately told her to sit down, but she remained standing, adjusting her camera for a few more seconds, her torso now fully outside the vehicle's profile. That was the fatal mistake. The hippo had been preparing to move inland along its established crossing route, the same route the vehicle was now partially blocking. When the animal registered the vehicle and the figure protruding from its side, it surged from the water with terrifying speed, charging directly toward the track. The guide slammed the accelerator, but the track sloped towards the riverbank, and the rear wheels hit loose sand churned up by previous vehicles. The tires spun briefly before catching traction, and the sudden movement threw Ava off balance while she was leaning outside the frame of the vehicle, leaving her no way to recover. She fell from the open side, hitting the ground beside the track. The charging hippo reached her within seconds. Weighing over 2 tons and moving at full speed, it struck her with its front body and knocked her to the ground, then continued forward along the crossing path, trampling her as it forced its way past the vehicle rather than stopping to attack. The impact caused devastating injuries, crushed ribs, severe chest trauma, shattered pelvic bones, and massive internal bleeding that began immediately. The hippo appeared focused on clearing the path and quickly moved back toward the shallows, disappearing into the water within moments. The guide drove forward several meters before stopping and radioing for emergency assistance. A patrol unit from the nearest checkpoint was dispatched immediately. Ava was unconscious when the response team arrived, her breathing shallow and irregular. She was transported toward the nearest medical facility outside the reserve, but died from severe internal injuries before reaching the hospital. The official report listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma, consistent with being trampled by a large animal. The investigation concluded that while the vehicle had stopped closer to the crossing route than intended, the fatal sequence was triggered by the passenger standing and leaning outside the vehicle during an active wildlife encounter. The guide was questioned during the review, but was cleared after officials determined the safety instructions had been given before the stop. The wildlife photography community responded with grief and frustration, many noting that the pressure to capture increasingly dramatic content was pushing creators into situations no photograph was worth. It was May 9, 2015, when Tallis Brunt, Zadie Glock, and Kender Fife set up camp at an unfenced remote savanna clearing in East Africa, ready to film their overnight wilderness challenge. Tallis, a 26-year-old prank creator, had convinced his friends that spending a night in the open bush would generate massive views. Zadie, 25, live-streamed every moment for her growing audience, while Kender, 27, managed the equipment. The clearing lay in a lightly monitored buffer zone outside regulated campsites, an area occasionally used by reckless self-drive travelers despite ranger warnings. Scattered acacia trees dotted the knee-high grass, stretching toward the horizon. Warm evening winds rustled the plain as distant animal calls echoed across the fading light. They cooked meat over an open fire, joking for the cameras about surviving the night among Africa's predators. After dinner, instead of sealing their waste, they tossed leftover meat scraps behind the camp to avoid the smell inside their tents. The food lay exposed as darkness settled, and the savanna sounds deepened. Far off, a hyena whooped, the call drifting through the warm air, followed later by another answering somewhere beyond the trees. Because of the heat, and for better footage, Tallis chose to sleep outside his tent near the fire pit, wrapped in a light blanket so the night camera could capture authentic survival. Zadie and Kender stayed inside their tents, leaving small openings for airflow and cables. Spotted hyenas are opportunistic predators and scavengers with one of the strongest bite forces of any land mammal, capable of crushing bone. They are nocturnal and frequently investigate camps when drawn by food scents. Though normally cautious around groups and fire, they can become bold when repeatedly rewarded with human scraps or unattended waste. For nearly half an hour after midnight, faint movement flickered beyond the firelight. Several hyenas approached cautiously, circling the discarded meat. First, they sniffed, fed, and drifted closer in slow arcs, testing the unfamiliar shapes and smells. Only after repeated passes did one edge toward the sleeping figure near the dying embers, its ears twitching at every small sound. The sudden movement came without warning. One hyena lunged at Tallis where he slept, clamping onto his lower leg and jerking backward. Tallis woke screaming as the animal dragged him across the dirt. His shouts jolted Zadie and Kender awake inside their tents. As Tallis struggled, the noise triggered the others. A second hyena rushed in and bit his other leg. Both animals now focused on pulling rather than killing, trying to drag him farther from the clearing before the group could fully react. Zadie burst from her tent with a flashlight, yelling as she ran forward. In her rush, she stumbled dangerously close to the dragging animals. Startled and already emboldened by the easy food, one hyena snapped at her forearm, tearing the flesh before darting back. She fell, clutching her arm, as Kender rushed past toward Tallis. Kender snatched a burning branch from the fire and waved it wildly, shouting. Sparks scattered and smoke billowed as he swung the flaming wood. The sudden firelight, noise, and movement made the hyenas hesitate. They circled briefly, darting in and out. One lunged once more and bit into Kender's thigh before recoiling as the branch swung toward its face, yelping as embers scattered across the dirt. The combined shouting, flames, and movement finally pushed the animals to retreat into the darkness, abandoning their attempt to drag Tallis away. But the damage had already been done. Talus lay bleeding heavily from deep bites to both legs and his lower torso. His breathing turned rapid and shallow as shock set in, his skin growing cold despite the warm night air. Zadie, injured but conscious, pressed clothing against the wounds while Kender tried to stop the bleeding with their gear, tightening makeshift bandages and applying pressure with trembling hands. With no signal and no immediate help, the hours before dawn felt endless. The fire burned low while the surrounding darkness pressed close. Talus drifted in and out of consciousness as blood loss worsened. Despite their efforts to keep pressure on the wounds and keep him awake, his pulse weakened steadily, each breath growing softer than the last. At first light, a ranger patrol arrived after a nearby research outpost radioed in reports of distant nighttime screams. By then, Talus had succumbed to blood loss and shock. Zadie and Kender survived with serious injuries and were later treated for deep bite wounds, fractures, and severe trauma. The investigation concluded that exposed food waste had drawn the hyenas and that sleeping outside the tents created the vulnerable opportunity that triggered the attack. Recovered footage showed the group laughing hours earlier, unaware of the danger beyond the firelight. The remote clearing was later restricted from informal overnight camping. It was September 19, 2014, and the late dry season had reduced the waterways of Zambia's South Luangwa Valley to sluggish brown channels flanked by exposed sand and cracked mud. The receding water had concentrated wildlife along the remaining river. A small, independently operated walking safari camp ran multi-day guided treks along the river system. Séverine Latrouche, a 39-year-old French freelance wildlife photographer based in Lyon, had arrived at the camp as part of a 7-day walking safari expedition. She had traveled extensively across East and Southern Africa and carried a professional reputation for pursuing close-range shots. Camp staff would later note she had questioned the group's pace on the first day, preferring to move independently. I find it interesting how experience can sometimes work against you. When you've been close to dangerous animals before and walked away fine, it rewires your sense of what's risky. You start trusting yourself more than the rules. The group of 6 guests was led by Chimwemwe Nkoma, a 42-year-old Zambian guide armed with a heavy-caliber rifle and carrying over 15 years of river experience on foot. He emphasized before each walk that guests must remain within visual contact of the guides and that approaching the river's edge was strictly prohibited. On the 3rd morning, the group paused on an elevated bank overlooking a river bend. A large colony of carmine bee-eaters had established nesting burrows in the exposed bank below. Latrouche moved away while the guides were occupied, descending toward the colony with her camera. She approached within a few feet of the water's edge. A tourist filming the colony from the group's rest position captured the initial seconds. Though the footage becomes unstable as the situation unfolds, the attack itself is partially obscured. Nile crocodiles are among the deadliest reptiles on Earth, responsible for more human fatalities than any other large predator in Africa. Mature males commonly exceed 15 feet and weigh over 1,500 pounds. Their attack relies on explosive acceleration from concealment, powerful jaws clamping onto a victim before dragging them into deeper water to drown. Bite force is estimated to exceed 3,000 pounds per square inch. Once a crocodile initiates its death roll, escape is virtually impossible. The crocodile struck from just below the surface at an angle. Massive jaws clamped around her lower leg, pulling her off her feet instantly. Nkoma scrambled down the bank and fired. The shot struck, but failed to interrupt the crocodile's momentum. Latrouche was pulled toward deeper water within seconds. Violent churning was visible at the surface as the crocodile initiated a death roll. The disturbance moved toward the center of the channel before the water settled to stillness. What gets me about crocodile attacks is the silence afterward. One moment there's chaos, splashing, screaming, and then the water just goes flat, like nothing happened. That stillness is the part I can't shake. Wildlife authorities recovered remains downstream after an extended search effort. The investigation confirmed Latrouche had left the group area without guide knowledge and approached the water in violation of safety protocols. No negligence was found on the part of Nkoma or the operator. The partial footage was seized as part of the investigation and has never been officially released. Looking at this case, the most dangerous moment on any walking safari isn't when you see the threat. It's when you forget it's there, right beneath the surface, waiting for you to take one step too many. It was July 18th, 2016, and the late afternoon heat was pressing down hard on a private game reserve near Hoedspruit in South Africa's Limpopo province. The bush was dry and golden, that kind of stillness where even the wind seems to hold its breath. Acacia trees dotted the landscape, their twisted branches throwing thin shadows over cracked earth. Somewhere ahead, partially hidden in tall grass, a lion was resting. Lesta Prim was a 24-year-old German woman working toward her full field guide certification, gaining practical hours at the reserve by leading small tourist groups under a senior ranger. People who worked with her described her as enthusiastic and eager to impress, but that eagerness had a downside. She'd been noted more than once for positioning vehicles too close and letting guests linger near predators longer than protocol allowed. Most of her experience had been with lions habituated to safari vehicles, animals that tolerate engines and metal frames without reacting. She'd told guests the lions were used to people, but being used to vehicles is not the same thing as being safe around humans on foot. That's a critical difference, and it's one she never fully internalized. The lion out there that day had been recently relocated, still adjusting to new territory, unfamiliar with human patterns, and far less predictable than the prides she'd trained around. That afternoon, Lesta was conducting a wildlife stop with a small group of tourists. The senior ranger had briefly stepped away to reposition the vehicle, and what she did next broke every protocol she'd ever been taught. African lions are apex predators. Females average between 265 and 395 pounds. Males exceed 420. They can explode into a sprint and close distance before you even register what's happening. Their killing method is suffocation. Jaws clamp around the throat, collapsing the windpipe or compressing the carotid arteries until you lose consciousness. Claws exceed 3 inches. Bite force is enough to crush and tear without effort. And here's what people don't understand. A lion doesn't see you the same way when you're outside the vehicle. Inside, you're part of something large and unthreatening. Outside, you're something else entirely. Lesta stepped out and walked toward the lion on foot. She moved ahead of the group, putting distance between herself and everyone else. The lion was lying partially concealed, watching. The second she broke away from that vehicle silhouette, everything changed. She was upright, alone, and moving. The lion dropped into a low, stalking posture, body flat, eyes locked. No growl, no warning. It charged explosively, and I mean zero hesitation. The impact knocked her completely off her feet. There was a brief struggle on the ground, but the lion was already repositioning. It locked its jaws around her throat, compressing her airway and the blood vessels in her neck simultaneously. Then it shook, hard. The force caused severe trauma to her cervical spine. She lost consciousness within seconds. The tourists stood frozen. Intervening would have meant risking a second attack. And honestly, by the time anyone could have reacted, it was already over. This one is hard for me. She was doing what she loved, standing in the place she wanted to be more than anywhere else in the world. And one moment of overconfidence took all of it away. The senior ranger returned to find the scene already finished. Lesta was pronounced dead from asphyxiation and vascular compromise combined with catastrophic cervical spine trauma. The reserve's investigation concluded the lion's behavior was a natural predatory response. The animal was not destroyed. Rangers pointed to relocation stress and the protocol violation as the key factors. I think what stays with me is that she wasn't reckless by nature. She just trusted her familiarity more than the rules. And out here, that's all it takes. Her family in Germany was notified, and the story hit the safari training community hard, a painful reminder that experience with calm, habituated lions means nothing when the animal in front of you isn't one of them. It was September 22nd, 2014, and darkness had settled over the Luangwa Valley in eastern Zambia. A private photographic concession offered night game drives using powerful spotlights, led by a senior guide licensed under the Zambia Wildlife Authority. Sarah Beth Quillen was a 27-year-old freelance wildlife photographer from Bristol, England, who had been shooting professionally for just under 3 years. She had built a growing portfolio of African predator work and had recently signed with a mid-tier nature photography agency, placing her images in editorial publications. The assignments were becoming more demanding. The agency wanted shots that stood out, the kind of proximity and intimacy that required pushing past standard observation distances. Quillen had internalized that pressure. She had not yet accumulated enough experience to understand where the line was. On at least 2 previous drives at other concessions, she had stepped off vehicles briefly to reposition, both times in daylight, both times with guides who had either not noticed or not objected forcefully enough to stop her. Nothing had happened. The behavior had become normalized. The night drive departed at 6:45 p.m. with 4 passengers. The vehicle was an open Land Cruiser with low side panels, standard for Luangwa photographic concessions, designed to maximize visibility rather than contain passengers. The driver emphasized that exiting was absolutely prohibited. The vehicle located a leopard 90 minutes into the drive. The large male was feeding on an impala carcass 40 yards from the track. The spotlight operator angled the beam to the side to avoid spooking the animal. In the indirect light, the leopard was visible in profile, jaw working through the carcass, eyes occasionally catching the edge of the beam. Quillen immediately requested repositioning for a better angle. The driver explained that movement would likely cause the leopard to abandon the kill. Quillen pushed back. The driver held his position. Over the next 20 minutes, Quillen grew increasingly frustrated. When the driver refused a final request to reposition, she announced she would step out briefly. He prohibited it immediately, and other passengers urged her to stay. Without further discussion, Quillen swung her legs over the low side panel on the far side of the vehicle and dropped to the ground with her camera before anyone could intervene. She moved quickly toward the leopard, staying low. Leopards are among Africa's most adaptable and least predictable predators, with large males weighing up to 170 pounds and possessing strength disproportionate to their size. These solitary animals are intensely territorial around kills, and when an escape route is blocked, they do not retreat, they attack. The charge is typically explosive and immediate, targeting the head, face, or neck. Unlike lions, leopards often disengage after delivering severe trauma, particularly when noise and light are present. The leopard had stopped feeding the moment Quillen's silhouette appeared outside the vehicle. It rose from the carcass and faced her. She continued to close, angling toward the carcass but drifting into the space between the leopard and the nearest tree cover. At roughly 15 yards, the leopard's escape route was gone. It charged. The distance closed in under 2 seconds. The leopard struck her with enough force to knock her off her feet, slashing across her face and upper body as she went down. Its jaws drove into her neck. The driver swung the spotlight onto the attack and gunned the engine forward while firing a shot into the ground beside the animal. The leopard held for a moment before the combination of the vehicles advance. The spotlight at close range and a second ground shot caused it to release and bolt into the darkness, abandoning the kill entirely. The driver reached Quillen within moments. The wounds to her neck and face were severe. Deep lacerations across her scalp, cheek, and jaw, and a penetrating bite to the lateral neck that had damaged but not fully severed the external jugular. She was conscious but in shock, breathing in shallow gasps. The driver applied direct pressure and radioed for emergency evacuation. The concession's emergency vehicle reached the scene within approximately 55 minutes. Quillen was stabilized, transported by road to the nearest clinic, then airlifted to a hospital in Lusaka. She arrived in surgery approximately 5 hours after the attack. The initial vascular repair was completed without complication. However, on post-operative day 5, Quillen developed severe septic shock. The deep tissue wounds had been heavily contaminated. Leopard mouths carry a complex polymicrobial load, and this animal had been feeding on a partially decomposed carcass, compounding the bacterial burden dramatically. The infection proved aggressive and resistant to initial coverage. Her condition deteriorated rapidly despite aggressive treatment and repeated debridement. She died in the ICU 8 days after the attack. The inquiry confirmed she had exited against instructions and positioned herself between a feeding leopard and its cover. No criminal negligence was found. Quillen's family filed a civil claim, alleging inadequate radio communication and arguing the driver should have physically prevented her exit. The case was settled confidentially, without admission of liability. It was March 12, 2018, Bandhavgarh National Park, central India. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Sal forest, casting long, broken shadows across the narrow dirt tracks that cut through the reserve. The air was heavy with heat and dust, thick with the distant calls of deer and the occasional shriek of langurs echoing through the canopy. On either side of the track, walls of elephant grass rose chest-high, head-high in places, a dense, shifting sea of vegetation that hid everything behind it. Gaps in the grass allowed a meter or two of visibility. Beyond that, nothing. Just green and whatever chose to stand inside it. Marvin Smith was 36 years old, a warehouse supervisor back home, and liked to film content from time to time. Marvin had flown to India with two longtime friends for a guided jeep safari, a trip he had been planning for the better part of a year. He wanted to film this moment, a moment to share and have fun. None of them had ever visited India before. Their understanding of tiger behavior was limited to documentaries and brief pre-safari briefings. Marvin was the proactive one of the group, the one who moved first, who pushed for closer views, who didn't always wait for the guide's cue. The signs had been there from the start of the day. Earlier, Marvin had stood briefly in the jeep, despite clear instructions to stay seated. During previous sightings, he had leaned outside the vehicle frame for photos, ignoring reminders from the guide. When told that the tall grass reduced visibility and sharply increased risk, he had listened, but only partially. The Bengal tiger is the largest living cat on the subcontinent and one of the most efficient solitary predators on Earth. A mature male can exceed 220 kilograms. It hunts primarily by ambush, using cover, silence, and patience to close within striking distance before exploding forward in a burst of speed and force that almost no prey animal can counter. Its canines drive deep into the neck. Its forelimbs hook, pull, and destabilize animals far larger than a human. A single bite to the throat can end a struggle in seconds. Tigers in parks like Bandhavgarh have grown accustomed to vehicle presence. They rest close to tracks, sometimes within meters, concealed by grass so thick that even experienced guides cannot see them. Late afternoon, the jeep had stopped along a narrow track bordered by towering walls of elephant grass. Alarm calls from deer deeper inside the vegetation had caught the guide's attention. The guide shifted focus, scanning the grass line. In that brief lapse, Marvin stepped down from the jeep, wanting to film the scenery. He moved quickly, fast enough that the guide could not react in time to stop him. Within seconds, he had pushed 5 to 8 meters into the grass. Inside the vegetation, the world changed. The ground was uneven, stalks resisting every step. Visibility collapsed to a meter or two. Sound became muffled and directionless. A tiger was already there, concealed in the cover, low to the ground, alert from the alarm calls. The animal had held its position as Marvin advanced. The moment the distance closed to within a few meters, the response triggered. The charge was explosive, a short, direct burst from concealment. The tiger made contact at the upper body, a crushing bite securing the shoulder and neck region, one forelimb hooking across the torso. The combined force drove Marvin off his feet and pulled him sideways to the ground. Once he was down, the tiger adjusted. The grip shifted in stages, repositioning across the throat until it settled into a stable killing hold. Sustained pressure compressed the airway. Major blood vessels in the neck were constricted, reducing blood flow to the brain. The struggle that followed was brief and uncoordinated, cut short by rapid physiological collapse. Loss of consciousness came within seconds to minutes. The tiger held position, maintaining bite pressure. Then it began to move, dragging the body deeper into the grass, vanishing completely from view. Death came from combined asphyxiation and reduced cerebral blood flow, compounded by severe soft tissue trauma to the neck. The guide had immediately ordered the remaining passengers to stay seated and still. A brief attempt to deter the animal with shouting and engine noise was made from the vehicle, but no approach was attempted. Forest authorities were radioed, and the scene was held from distance, An investigation followed in the days after. The findings were consistent. A visitor who exited the vehicle without permission, in dense cover, in the immediate space of an animal no one had known was there. Marvin's family received the news with shock and grief. The public reaction carried the familiar weight that follows these stories: sorrow and the quiet recognition that tigers in the tall grass do not give second chances. It was August 9th, 2018, and the Zambezi River moved sluggishly through the floodplain of Zimbabwe's Mana Pools region, its waters reduced by peak dry season to a fraction of their volume. The shrinking river had concentrated massive pods of hippopotamus into crowded pools and reed channels, with territorial males defending diminishing space. A small safari lodge operated multi-day canoe safari excursions along this stretch. Rosalind Critchlow, a 57-year-old retired solicitor from Bath, England, had booked the 3-day canoe safari as the final leg of a southern African itinerary. An experienced traveler, she had never undertaken a river-based safari. She completed a paddling orientation at the lodge before departure. The canoe safari group of 4 canoes carrying 8 guests was led by Takudzwa Chirinda, a 34-year-old Zimbabwean river guide with over 8 years of Zambezi experience. Chirinda briefed the group that hippopods would be given wide clearance, travel would be single file, and his navigation decisions were final. Something about canoe safaris has always made me uneasy. On a game drive, you have a vehicle, an engine, metal around you. On the water, you have a thin shell of fiberglass and a paddle. That's the entire barrier between you and whatever's underneath. The first day passed without incident. The second morning, low water had visibly compressed the channel, and hippo activity was heavier. Chirinda navigated along the main channel, steering clear of known hippo concentrations. The guest paddling behind Critchlow's canoe was wearing a head-mounted action camera. The camera recorded the capsizing, though the footage becomes submerged and chaotic within seconds of the impact. Hippopotamuses are widely regarded as one of the leading causes of large animal-related deaths in Africa. Adult males weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds. Their massive jaws open nearly 180 degrees, revealing lower canines exceeding 16 inches. Bite force exceeds 1,800 pounds per square inch. During dry season, shrinking water forces territorial males into closer proximity with rivals, dramatically increasing aggression. Solitary males displaced from pods are considered particularly dangerous, occupying unpredictable positions and responding to intrusion with immediate violence. That last detail is the one that really gets to me. A displaced male doesn't belong to a pod, doesn't stay in a known pool, and doesn't follow the patterns that guides have spent years memorizing. It's the one variable you can't plan for. The solitary male had been submerged in a section of the channel not known to contain a pod. Chirinda had no indication of its presence. The hippo surfaced directly beside Critchlow's canoe, its massive head rising from the brown water. It struck the canoe broadside, capsizing it instantly and throwing Critchlow into the shallower edge of the channel. I keep coming back to the randomness of it. A few yards to the left or right, and the hippo surfaces beside a different canoe or misses them entirely. That's the margin. A few yards on a river that stretches for thousands of miles. The hippo lunged toward her in the shallows. Its jaws opened wide and came down on her midsection. The animal bit down with crushing force and jerked violently, then released before submerging and circling back. Briefly, Chirinda paddled back and struck the water with his paddle in an attempt to distract the animal, causing it to disengage, but the initial assault had already caused fatal damage. Just imagining Chirinda turning that canoe around and paddling toward a 4,000-pound hippo with nothing but a paddle. That's a kind of courage most people never have to find in themselves, and even that wasn't enough. Chirinda and another guest lifted Critchlow onto a sandbar. He radioed the lodge for emergency evacuation. She had sustained catastrophic crushing injuries and showed no signs of breathing by the time the evacuation boat arrived approximately 40 minutes later. She was later declared dead. The investigation determined Chirinda had navigated correctly. avoided all known hippo concentrations, and followed standard procedures. The displaced male's position was unforeseeable. Kirinda was cleared of all fault. Canoe safari operations were temporarily suspended pending a safety review, and the Wildlife Authority issued an advisory on hippo displacement risks during low water conditions. The footage was submitted as evidence during a coroner's inquest and has not been made publicly available. This is the story that stays with me the longest. Not because someone broke the rules or made a bad call, but because everything was done right, and it still wasn't enough. Sometimes the river just decides, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. It was June 12th, 2013, when Dorian Hale, Mira Sullivan, Keaton Rusk, and Nyla Crest arrived at a dry season waterhole in the East African savannah, their low, doorless, open-top safari truck positioned for what they believed would be spectacular wildlife footage. Dorian, a 38-year-old lead influencer, had built his brand on staging dramatic safari content that pushed boundaries. Mira, 31, was a wildlife photographer seeking ground-level shots that would set her portfolio apart from typical safari images. Keaton, 28, constantly encouraged risky stunts for views, while Nyla, 27, managed their social media updates and filmed behind-the-scenes content. The four had collaborated on multiple projects, each one more daring than the last. The waterhole sat in a shallow depression, surrounded by tall, golden grass that swayed in the hot breeze. During the dry season, it became a crucial gathering point for wildlife, which also meant predators often rested nearby, concealed and difficult to spot from only a short distance away. As they approached, the group noticed several vague shapes in the grass, but dismissed them as rocks or termite mounds. Heat shimmer distorted the view, and the driver slowed uneasily, scanning left and right. He warned that anything indistinct near a waterhole could be dangerous and suggested keeping distance, reminding them to remain seated inside the vehicle. Dorian insisted. When the driver hesitated again, Dorian pressed harder, saying they needed the closer angle and threatening to leave a negative review and cancel payment if the guide refused. Reluctantly, and after repeating his warning, the driver eased the vehicle forward and stopped, while cameras came up, and Nyla lifted her phone to record. A lion pride was resting in the tall grass in partial shade. African lions are ambush predators that rely on concealment and explosive speed, and at busy dry season waterholes, some prides grow accustomed to vehicles, though they still react strongly to people who separate from them or move unpredictably nearby. The first mistake came when Mira stepped down from the vehicle to grab what she thought would be a quick ground-level shot before the driver could stop her. The sudden movement on the ground at close range triggered an immediate response. A nearby lioness burst from cover and closed the short distance in seconds. A heavy forepaw slammed Mira down before the jaws closed on her throat, the lioness maintaining the suffocating hold typical of lion kills. As Mira struggled beneath her weight, the attack unfolded almost instantly, her movements slowing as the grip held. The truck erupted in shouting and frantic motion. Lions in the grass lifted their heads and stood, alert and agitated by the noise. The pride shifted uneasily, tension spreading through the group as multiple sudden movements registered at once. Dorian, standing upright above the roofline to film, tried to pull back in alarm. He lost his balance and tumbled awkwardly over the low side of the open vehicle, hitting the ground hard beside it. His fall and thrashing drew attention from two nearby lionesses already stimulated by the disturbance. One rushed in and seized high on his shoulder and torso, pulling him down, while the second hovered close and bit when he tried to rise. Their reaction appeared driven by his exposed movement on the ground, rather than any focus on the vehicle itself. For several chaotic moments, the pride milled in agitation, some backing off, others pacing, confusion stretching the danger across several frantic minutes rather than a single instant. Seeing both Mira and Dorian down, Keaton panicked and bolted from the opposite side. His sudden sprint triggered a chase response from a large male lion resting farther out in the grass. The male surged forward, overtook him within seconds, and swiped him to the ground before clamping a crushing bite across the upper back and neck, maintaining pressure in the instinctive manner used to subdue fleeing prey. Inside the vehicle, Nyla screamed and scrambled in terror. Instead of dropping low into the footwell, she climbed onto the seat and leaned far over the open side toward the front. Her torso hung almost completely outside the low, doorless frame, head and shoulders dipping well below the roofline and into striking reach. A nearby lioness, already keyed up by the chaos and movement, lunged upward. Her forepaws struck the vehicle's side as her jaws caught Nyla high at the neck and shoulder. The force dragged Nyla off balance and pulled her from the opening. She released briefly to reposition once Nyla hit the ground, then clamped again as the motion subsided. Afterward, the Pride did not attack the truck further. Instead, as is typical, their focus remained on the individuals on the ground. For several tense minutes, the lions clustered nearby, watchful and alert, occasionally lifting their heads toward the vehicle and surrounding grass. Only after the scene had gone still for some time did they begin dragging the bodies intermittently into the tall grass, pausing often to scan their surroundings before moving deeper into cover. The driver, shaking badly and fighting panic, avoided sudden movement while the lions remained close. When the animals shifted their attention fully to the carcasses and moved farther into the grass, he restarted the engine and drove rapidly toward the nearest ranger station, radio crackling as he reported the attack in a strained voice. A response team arrived from a station nearly 70 kilometers away, reaching the site within roughly 2 hours, but could only recover remains after the Pride had moved off. Investigators later concluded the incident likely involved multiple safety breaches, approaching too close to concealed predators at a dry season water source, pressuring the driver to ignore caution, exiting the vehicle, and repeatedly exposing upper bodies outside the open truck. Actions that removed the protective effect vehicles normally provide and contributed to the escalating chain of events. It was June 14th, 2018, and the Chobe River moved sluggishly through the floodplain, marking the border between Botswana and Namibia. The dry season had reduced water levels significantly, exposing broad, sandy banks along both sides. Devora Schellings was a 39-year-old ecotourism consultant from Johannesburg whose firm advised safari lodges on sustainable practices. Her background included field research in wildlife management, and she often referenced her experience to justify confidence around dangerous animals. Schellings had conducted foot-based environmental surveys in shallow river systems during earlier research, wading through ankle and knee-deep water to collect samples and photograph bank erosion dozens of times without incident. Over the years, still, clear, shallow water had stopped registering as dangerous in her mind. It was a blind spot built from repeated safe exposure, not from ignorance. The afternoon boat excursion departed at 3:30 p.m. with 4 passengers. The operator conducted a safety briefing emphasizing that entering the water was strictly prohibited. The river supported large crocodile populations that remained active throughout the dry season. 90 minutes in, the operator maneuvered toward a sandy bank where several large crocodiles had been basking. The reptiles slid into the water as the boat approached, unhurried, sliding off the bank one after another until the sand was empty. The operator positioned the boat at a safe distance from shore. Schellings stated she needed shoreline shots for client reports and pushed for a closer approach. The operator explained that crocodiles had just entered the exact area between the boat and the bank. Schellings dismissed the concern, stating the shallow water made an attack unlikely. The operator repeated his prohibition. As the operator repositioned, the engine stalled briefly in the shallows. While he leaned over the stern to restart it, Schellings moved quickly to the bow. It is unclear whether she interpreted the stalled engine and the resulting drift toward shore as an opportunity or as implicit permission, but she stepped off the bow and into the water before anyone could react. The water reached mid-thigh. She began wading toward the bank with her camera raised. The operator, having restarted the engine, shouted for her to return. She waved her hand without looking back. Nile crocodiles are Africa's largest freshwater predator, with mature males exceeding 16 feet and weighing over 1,600 pounds. They possess among the most powerful bites of any living animal. Their hunting strategy is built entirely on concealment and surprise. There is rarely any warning. The initial strike is a sudden surge from stillness, followed immediately by the death roll, a rapid spinning maneuver designed to disorient prey and pull it underwater. Once submerged and rolling, a victim loses all sense of direction almost immediately. The strike came without warning, a violent surge from the shallows that sent water erupting around her. Schellings was pulled off her feet immediately and submerged within seconds. She surfaced once, briefly, one arm visible above the water, before the rolling pulled her back under. The surface churned briefly, then went still. The operator gunned the engine toward the site. One passenger struck at the water with a paddle. The water returned to stillness. There was nothing to reach. Partial remains were recovered 2 days later, several hundred meters downstream, located after a report from local fishermen narrowed the search area. The investigation concluded Schellings had entered the water against explicit instructions in an area where crocodiles had been observed entering moments earlier. No criminal negligence was found. The inquest returned a finding of accidental death by misadventure. It was May 27, 2018, and the sun was dropping fast over Sabi Sands Game Reserve in South Africa. That golden hour light was fading into something darker, and the bush was doing what it always does at dusk, shifting. The birds go quiet, the shadows stretch, and the animals that hunt by ambush start to move. The lodge sat unfenced on the edge of the reserve. Beautiful place. Open-air dining, walkways between buildings, the whole luxury safari experience. Staff had warned guests about predator movement during the transition hours, that window between daylight and darkness when visibility drops, and the rules of the bush change. Leopards in the area were partially habituated, comfortable enough around human infrastructure to move through it, but absolutely still wild, still predators. Tilda Braun was a 33-year-old solo traveler staying at the lodge. She'd come to South Africa on her own, which takes a certain kind of confidence. Traveling solo through Big Five territory isn't something most people do. She wasn't reckless by nature. She wasn't ignoring rules for a thrill. By all accounts, she was someone who loved travel and wanted to experience the bush up close. But that evening, as the light was failing, Tilda walked between buildings alone. No escort, no companion, just her, moving through open space as dusk settled in. I need to talk to you about leopards, because I think they're the most unsettling predator on this continent. Not the biggest, not the strongest, but pound for pound, the most efficient killer out there. A male leopard can weigh up to 200 pounds, but even females at 130 are devastatingly powerful. They are solitary ambush hunters. They don't chase you down across open ground like a lion. They wait, they watch, and they close the distance without you ever knowing they're there. Their approach is silent, genuinely silent. Padded feet, low body, using every piece of cover available. Grass, shadow, furniture, walls, whatever's there. They attack from behind almost every time, targeting the neck. Their killing method is precise, a bite that compresses the airway and blood vessels simultaneously. You lose consciousness in seconds. These animals drag prey twice their weight into trees. The strength-to-size ratio is hard to believe. Tilda was walking through the lodge grounds, partially bent forward, adjusting something she was carrying. She paused, and I need you to understand what that looked like from the leopard's perspective. A lone figure, dusk light, crouched. Posture, stationary, distracted. Every one of those is a vulnerability cue to an ambush predator. The leopard had been using vegetation and shadows along the walkway for concealment. It closed the distance without a sound. Tilda had no idea it was there. It launched from behind. The impact drove her forward and down, body hitting the ground hard. Claws anchored deep into her back, pinning her immediately. There was a brief struggle, arms moving, body twisting, but the leopard was already repositioning. It secured a bite around the back of her neck, clamping down on her airway and the blood vessels on both sides. The pressure was immediate and total. Her movements slowed within seconds. The compression cut off oxygen and blood flow to the brain simultaneously. She went limp. This one really messes with me. She didn't make a dramatic mistake. She didn't ignore a warning or push a boundary. She walked between two buildings at the wrong time of day, and something was watching her the entire way. Staff discovered the scene shortly after. Emergency responders confirmed the cause of death as asphyxiation and vascular compromise from a sustained neck bite. The back injuries from the initial strike were severe, but secondary to the killing bite. The lodge reinforced strict dusk movement policies. No guest movement between buildings without an armed escort after a certain hour. The investigation attributed the attack to predator habituation and human vulnerability cues. The leopard had grown comfortable navigating the lodge grounds, and Tilda's posture, isolation, and timing aligned with exactly the kind of target a leopard is built to exploit. The animal was monitored, but not destroyed. What I can't shake about Tilda's story is how quiet it was. No charge across open ground, no roaring, no warning, just silence, and then it was over. Her story didn't make massive headlines, but within the safari industry, it reinforced something guides already knew. Dusk belongs to the leopard, and if you're moving through their space alone, you might never hear what's coming. It was July 18th, 2017, when the Vancy family arrived at a private savanna reserve in East Africa, cameras ready and expectations high. Grover Vancy, a 41-year-old travel vlogger known for pushing boundaries to capture risky wildlife footage, had planned the trip for months. His wife Marla, 39, was a lifestyle influencer documenting every moment online. Their 3 children, Caspian, 14, Jetta, 11, and Bodhi, 8, were used to their parents' content-driven lifestyle. The reserve stretched endlessly around them, golden grass swaying beneath a harsh sun, acacia trees dotting the horizon. Grover chose this location for closer vehicle access to wildlife than most parks, though rangers warned that exiting vehicles near predators and flying drones were forbidden. That morning, their guide radioed that another safari vehicle ahead was stuck and drove forward to assist just beyond the rise. After confirming by radio that no predators had been reported nearby, he instructed the Vancys to remain inside with doors closed and said he would return shortly. Moments after the guide's vehicle slipped out of sight, Grover dismissed the rules as overly cautious. He stepped out beside the parked vehicle, laughing into the camera that lions usually ignored. Vehicles and tourists exaggerated the danger. Marla hesitated but followed. Caspian quietly launched the banned drone, sending it buzzing overhead. Jetta hovered near the open door, eager to spot animals, while Bodhi mimicked his siblings, trying to seem brave. African lions are apex predators, and among the continent's most efficient hunters. Females do most of the hunting, working together to bring down prey larger than themselves. Lions often rest in the heat, but remain alert to opportunity. When disturbed, or when movement appears nearby, instinct can override their lethargy with explosive speed. The fatal mistake came when the Vancy family edged farther from their vehicle. After spotting shapes in the tall grass, Grover urged them around the front for a better shot, where the high grass partly blocked their view. They moved several steps out, focused on framing wildlife behind them. Above, the drone dipped lower, its whine slicing through the stillness and agitating the concealed pride. One lioness lifted her head. Another rose and moved low through the grass, nearly invisible. The family stayed focused on their cameras. Jetta had wandered furthest, crouching to adjust her angle when the first lioness burst from cover and crossed the short distance in seconds. She slammed into the 11-year-old, knocking her flat. Dust exploded as the lioness grappled, biting into Jetta's shoulder and face before shifting to the throat. Grover shouted and rushed forward, but the sudden movement triggered more predatory focus. As Jetta's attack unfolded, a second lioness charged at Grover, striking his side and sending him stumbling. He tried to retreat, but she seized his shoulder and dragged him down. He fought briefly before she repositioned and locked onto his neck, crushing tissue as he weakened within seconds. Marla screamed and grabbed Bodhi, pulling him toward the vehicle in blind terror. For a moment, they seemed close enough to reach it. The commotion drew a large male lion resting only meters deeper in the grass. He rose, fixed on the frantic movement, and lunged as Marla stumbled. His weight slammed into them, knocking both down. The male bit Marla first as she tried to shield Bodhi. When the child suddenly crawled free and cried out, the movement triggered the lion to strike again, pinning Bodhi and biting into his torso. Caspian, frozen at first, finally bolted for the vehicle, adrenaline carrying him several strides before he tripped on uneven ground. He scrambled up, hands slipping in the dust. But another lioness, already circling behind the grass line, rushed in. She grabbed, briefly lost hold, then seized him higher at the neck. A violent shake followed. leaving him motionless in the dust. The chaos lasted less than a minute. First the strike on Jeddah, then Grover's failed charge, followed by desperate attempts to flee. After several tense seconds scanning the area, the lions began dragging the bodies into taller grass, pausing to reposition their grips as they pulled them away from the abandoned vehicle and scattered equipment. Death came through airway crushing, catastrophic trauma, and blood loss. Overhead, the drone continued circling until its battery died. Reserve staff initiated a search after repeated unanswered radio calls, and the guide's delayed return raised concern. They discovered the scene later that day, once the unattended vehicle was located. The investigation confirmed the family had violated safety protocols by leaving their vehicle without authorization and flying a prohibited drone near a resting Pride. Footage recovered showed how quickly the situation escalated once the lions were disturbed. The reserve later tightened supervision and penalties for leaving vehicles in predator zones. It was August 9th, 2017, and the late afternoon light was turning everything amber along the banks of the St. Lucia estuary in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province. The water was dark and slow-moving, flanked by dense reeds and mudflats stretching out in every direction. The air was thick, humid, carrying the smell of wet earth and vegetation. Worn trails cut through the mud along the shoreline, and these weren't made by people. These were hippo paths, carved by animals moving between grazing land and water, and they were everywhere if you knew what to look for. Garrick Vone was a 38-year-old travel vlogger who'd built a following by getting dangerously close to wildlife and capturing footage most people would never attempt. His content was bold, often reckless, and that's exactly what his audience rewarded. He had no formal training in animal behavior, no real understanding of the species he filmed beyond what looked good on camera. He'd come to St. Lucia with a small group of friends to shoot golden hour footage along the estuary. Now, this area is known for one of the highest hippo concentrations in South Africa. Locals know the unspoken rules. You watch the trails, you respect the water's edge, and you never, ever position yourself between a hippo and its route back to the river. Garrick either didn't know those rules or didn't think they applied to him. He believed hippos were slow, passive animals, the kind of thing you see yawning in a nature documentary. That assumption was about to cost him everything. That afternoon, he moved ahead of his friends along the riverbank, scanning for angles, camera up, completely locked in on the shot. So let me tell you about hippos, because most people get these animals completely wrong. They are among the most dangerous animals in Africa. Despite those heavy, barrel-shaped bodies, they are shockingly fast, close to 20 miles per hour on land. Adult males can weigh over 4,000 pounds. Their jaws open to nearly 180 degrees, and those canine teeth can exceed 16 inches. And here's the thing, those tusks aren't for eating. Hippos are herbivores. Those teeth are built purely for combat, and they can sever limbs, crush skulls, and kill with a single bite. They are fiercely territorial around water access, and if you're standing between a hippo and the river, that animal sees you as a threat. Period. A hippo had been grazing inland, lined up with one of those worn trails heading back to the water. Garrick walked directly into that path while filming. He was facing the wrong way, trying to frame a shot along the bank. The hippo oriented toward him. Almost no warning, no vocalization, no display. It just came. Garrick turned and tried to move, but he was way too late. The impact hit him like nothing you can prepare for, knocked him violently to the ground. Before he could even process what happened, the hippo's jaws came down on his torso, ribs crushed instantly. He was still conscious when the animal lifted him and threw him. His body hit the ground hard, and the hippo came forward again. A second bite drove those massive tusks into his midsection, puncturing through tissue and organ. The damage was immediate and unsurvivable. This one really gets to me. He wasn't even aware of the danger. He was looking through a lens while standing in the one place you should never be, and he had no idea. His friends watched from a distance. There was nothing they could do. By the time the hippo pulled back toward the water, Garrick was motionless. Emergency responders confirmed what everyone already knew. Cause of death was massive internal trauma from crushing bite force. Wildlife authorities concluded the hippo's response was a natural territorial reaction. He'd blocked its water access, and that was enough. No action was taken against the animal. What hits me about Garrick's story is he went there to capture something beautiful, and he was standing on a line he couldn't see. The story spread fast online, and within the vlogging community it sparked a brief conversation about where the line sits between content and recklessness, though whether that conversation actually changed anything, I honestly doubt it.